the first video was Zach Williams, like John said, is Zach Williams, and he shared a little bit of his struggles and how God rescued him. And you can kind of get the theme as we've been going along here is that we're going to be talking about our great God who is our rescuer. He's our rescuer. He's our Savior, and he saves us. So we're in this series called Legacy of Faith. Legacy of Faith. And the question is what are people going to say about your faith? You know, what are people going to say about your faith? I mean, when you get to the end of your life, what are people going to say about your faith? What are they going to say about your relationship with God? And what impact is your life going to have on the people around you? You know, think about who impacted you in your faith. You know, think about the people in your lives, the people that God sent your way and in your relationships with them, and you saw their faith in God and it impacted you. Think about those people. Think about the impact that they had on your life and how it changed the direction of your life and how you decided by seeing their faith, you decided to give your life, to surrender your life and trust God with your life. The impact that it had on you. See, I don't know about you, but I want to be one of those kind of people. You know, I want to be one of those kind of people who just lives for God and glorifies God, and that my faith is that it passes on to others around me. That other people see my faith in God in my life, and that it impacts their lives, that it changes the direction of their lives. I want to be one of those people that a person like Lacey Sturm or somebody that's struggling or lost in this life, and they're just lost, and they may have everything good going for them, but they don't have a relationship with God. I want to be one of those kind of people who when they encounter me, that they see God in my life. They see my faith in God, that it impacts them. I want to be one of those kind of people, and I don't know about you. I mean, I want to be one of those kind of people. There's Jackie and I's a youth leader that used to be the youth minister, and his wife, and I talked about her life and the impact that her life had. You know, and when they had her funeral, the building was packed, full of the people that her life, her faith in God impacted and changed. And that would be amazing, wouldn't it? When you got to your end of your days and you would pack a building of people who you influenced with your faith, who your faith in God led them to this life-changing relationship with God. That'd be amazing. And I want to be one of those kind of people. I want to leave behind, guys, a legacy of faith. That's what I want to leave behind. That's why we're doing this series, because I believe that God wants all of us to leave behind a legacy of faith. See, we read in this book, from beginning to end, there are faithful men and women in this book, isn't it? It's full of faithful men and women. People who loved God, who believed in God, who trusted in God. And because of their faith, we're here today in this building. Because of their faith, it impacted the people's lives around them. And the church began to grow, and it began to spread from person to person. And one person was impacted by somebody's faith, and their lives changed, and they impacted people. And the church began to grow because of this legacy of faith, because of this faith in God. And God began to grow the church, and it was passed on from one person to the next. Can we have that kind of faith? You know, can we have the kind of faith that the men and women have in the Bible? And the answer is yes. Guys, we can have the same faith that we read in this book, the same faith that John and Paul and Peter and Philip and all of those guys in the Bible had. We can have that same faith. And God could use our faith to impact the world around us in this community. See, there are men and women today that have this incredible faith, that are incredibly faithful to God. I mean, we see it all around us, and there are people in this room that have incredible faith in God. I mean, just in the end of the video, it was a picture of Billy Graham. Man, we would say that is a credible man of faith and the impact that he had on this world, and we could have that same faith in God, and God could use our faith to do just as much impacting in this world. You see, these men and women lived out 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 through 9, and specifically for verse 7. Paul says this, "For we live by faith and not by sight," he says. We live by faith and not by sight. He says we are confident. We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from my body, and at home with the Lord. So we make it our goal, he says. He has this big word, so. So we make it our goal to please him, to please God. Whether we are at home in the body, and what he's saying is we make every effort to please God while we are on this planet, while we are living here or away from it with him in heaven. We make it our goal to please God, to serve God, and to glorify him in all that we do, in all that we say. You see, they realize, and Paul realizes, you see, guys, faith isn't just a one-time thing. Faith is an everyday thing. You know, faith, living this faith out is in every step, step by step by step. And everything we do, we display our faith, right? You know, when we get up in the morning and we pray and we read our Bibles and we spend time with God, when we honor somebody and serve somebody and care about somebody, when we love somebody or we make dinner for somebody, you know, our faith is being displayed in everything that we do. But here's the thing is probably, and you know, I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I think that probably the time that it shines the most is in our trials, isn't it? When a trial comes, when a crisis comes into our lives, generally our faith, that is when the moment when our faith shines the brightest. It's generally when that trial comes into our path, into our life, that wall that we face is an opportunity for our faith to shine for God. And in the Bible, guys, we see time after time after time, the men and women of God would face trials. They would face difficult times. They would face something in order for their faith to be displayed, for God to be glorified through their trial, through their situation. And guys, every one of us sees a trial at some point or another. None of us are immune to it. And there may be little trials or there may be big trials. And I hope that you never have to experience a big trial. But here's the thing is, guys, death is one of those things that crosses our paths. Every single one of us. And it's something we're all going to face. And that is a moment that we have to think about our God and trust in our God in those moments. Every one of us will face a crisis or a trial in our lives. And Elisha and his servant faced one of those trials. And if you guys have your Bibles, turn to 2 Kings chapter 6. 2 Kings chapter 6. And that's what we're going to learn from this morning. 2 Kings chapter 6, starting in verse 8. And we're going to learn from Elisha and his servant this morning and see what we can learn from them about faith. Now, Elisha is a prophet. Elisha is a prophet, and a prophet is somebody who God chooses to speak for him. You know, God chooses a prophet to speak to his people, to give direction to his people, to correct his people, to give them a word. And Elisha was a prophet of God. He spoke for God. Also, one thing we have to learn about Elisha is that he learned from the great prophet Elijah. He was Elijah's pupil. Elijah passed on his faith to Elisha. And he was building this legacy of faith. So Elisha learned from Elijah. And hopefully I don't mix those two names. You guys know how that goes sometimes. But as I'm teaching this lesson, but Elisha learned from Elijah. And Elijah was a great prophet of God. He's one of two people who did not die, that God took into heaven. That's amazing to think about. And so this is who Elisha learns from. And also the other thing that we have to understand as we begin reading this text this morning is that in the beginning of 2 Kings, there is a miracle after miracle after miracle. It goes from one miracle to another miracle. One crisis to another crisis. You guys see where we're going here? That's the beginning of 2 Kings. That's where we pick up this story. Elisha's faith is displayed over and over again. And now Elisha faces his own crisis, his own trial. So how is this man of faith going to react? How's he going to shine in this moment? So we pick it up, 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 8. This is what it says. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such place. And then the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God, by Elisha. Time and again, Elisha warned the king of Israel so that he was on his guard in such places. So Elisha was warning the king of Israel, this is where the king of Aram is going to be. Some of your Bibles say the king of Syria. But he says, this is where the king's going to be. So don't, just be aware and be ready. And don't get trapped up or caught up in that place. So Elisha was protecting the king of Israel. This enraged the king of Aram, or the king of Syria. And he summoned his officers and demanded of them, tell me, he said, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? So he's looking for a spy, right? He's like, somebody's telling him where I'm going. They're telling the king of Israel where I'm going to be. He's always ready. He's always skipping by me. Somebody's giving him information. Who is it? Tell me who it is. And the men that were around him said, none of us, my lord, the king, said one of his officers, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Isn't that crazy? That's wild, isn't it? And he said, there's a man of God that has this relationship with God, and he's able to hear in your bedroom your war room secrets, where you're going to be. You're going to be there and here and there. He knows it all, and he tells the king. It's Elisha, this man of God with this incredible faith. They know who he is from a prior miracle. So he says, go find out where he is, the king of Aram says. Go find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back, he is in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and they surrounded the city. So the king surrounds the city where Elisha lives, where he is at. They surround Elisha to capture him. It says, when the servant of the man of God got up, so when Elisha's servant got up, he went out early the next morning. An army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. So this servant of Elisha gets up, grabs his coffee, getting ready to start his duties for the morning. He's just kind of rubbing his eyes. He opens the door with his coffee. And then it says, oh no! He says, my Lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. So all of a sudden he walks out the door, he sees this mighty army surrounding the city, surrounding Elisha and him. And he's like, we're trapped. What are we going to do? Oh no, he says. Then Elisha, don't be afraid, he says. He gets up, he wakes up, he says, don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. So that's what he says to the servant. And the servant is like, what are you talking about? I don't see anybody out there. What are you talking about? And Elisha, it says, and Elisha prayed. Elisha prayed. He turned to God and he prayed. He said, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. So that he may see. Now this is incredible. See, Elisha is this man of God. He is so close with God. His faith in God is so great. His trust in God. He knows that there's an army. He sees it. He knows it. And he trusts that God is protecting them. So he turns to God and he says, God, open my servant's eyes so he could see. Open his eyes so he can see. It says, then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Wow. Isn't that amazing? He opened his eyes. God opened the servant's eyes, and then all of a sudden he's looking down and he's like, wow. Wow. All around Elisha are these horses and chariots of fire, God's army, protecting them, watching over them. As the enemy came down towards them, the enemy charges. They don't see this army. They charge towards Elisha, and Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike this army with blindness, he says. As Elisha had asked, Elisha told them, wait, did I miss something? So Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike this army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. And Elisha told them, this is not the road, and this is not the city. He says, this is not the road, and this is not the city. I don't know if anybody gets this, Star Wars. This is not the droids you're looking for. These are not, this is not the road, this is not the city. You're lost. So Elisha prays to God, strike them with blindness, and all of a sudden they're riding their horses down, all of a sudden they're blind. They don't know where they're going. They can't see a single thing. And they come up and they're like, I can see it be like a mess. You know what I'm saying? And Elisha goes to them and he goes, this isn't the city you're looking for. This isn't the place. You know, let me take you somewhere, he says. Let me take you to the place. And he says that, and he led them to Samaria. After they entered the city, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see again. And the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked. And there they were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them? And we got to understand that the king of Israel at this point, this is where Israel has divided. You got the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. The kingdom of Israel, and it's an amazing thing that God is actually protecting still the kingdom of Israel in this moment, because the king of Israel, all the kings of Israel were evil in the eyes of God. They didn't follow God. And you can see his heart right here, in his direction. And he says, this is what Elisha says, do not kill them, he answered. Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them, so they may eat and drink and then go back to their master. So he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. So no longer did they raid at that time Israel's territory. So this is an incredible, incredible faith story. This is what Hebrews 11:1 says. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. So that's what faith is. Hebrews 11:1 tells us that faith is this confidence in what we hope for in our relationship with God, and assurance about what we do not see. And that's the faith that Elisha has in God. He trusts God. He has faith and confidence in God, that God has his own best interest at hand, and that God is doing something, and Elijah is God's servant in the midst of that. So whatever happens, he trusts God, and he knows that there's something bigger, that this time, in this moment, on this little planet, on this little rock, in this great big universe, that there is something more beyond this. And he trusts in God, and he lives with God and in his kingdom, and he believes in something that he cannot see with his eyes or touch with his hands. He knows that there's something bigger going on. So what do we learn from Elisha? Number one, here's the first thing. Obstacles in life are opportunities to build a legacy of faith. Obstacles in life are opportunities to build a legacy of faith. You know, these moments of crisis that come into our lives are opportunities to build faith in others. We have to look at it this way. That's how we got to look at life. These moments that come into our lives, these crises, these roadblocks are only opportunities for us to display our faith in God, to glorify Him, and to shine for Him. You see, life is full of opportunities, right? I mean, we all know there's difficulties every day and things, little things, small things, but there's also major difficulties in our lives. People are watching you. People are watching you. You know, your kids are watching you. How are you going to handle this situation? How are you going to be faithful in the midst of this trial, midst of this difficult time? Your parents, maybe your parents aren't believers. They're watching you. I know my dad is watching me. You know, your parents are watching you. You know, your friends are watching you. Your coworkers are watching you. When you say that you're a Christian, they're watching you. How are you going to handle this moment, this crisis, this opportunity? People are watching us. And Elisha had an opportunity right here to teach his servant. You know, he had an opportunity. His servant is watching. What would his servant, how did his servant react? Oh no, we're trapped. He saw a roadblock. All he saw was what the physical was there. And Elisha had an opportunity to pass on faith to his servant. He had an opportunity to show him, to help him to see that this is bigger. This life is bigger than what you see on this little planet. There's so much more. And he asked God to open his eyes so he could see beyond what we see and touch and feel, that there is something beyond that. You know, I love the fact that his servant walks out there and says, oh no. You know, this is in the Bible because this is how we react sometimes, isn't it? I mean, how many of you have been there? I've been there. You know, when a crisis comes, I'm like, oh no, you know, another one. You know, we've just been talking about some of those things. Pitt was talking about his car and all that. But these crises come, these oh no moments come in our lives. How are we going to react to these? You see, we're in trouble sometimes. And that's just the nature of this world, guys. We live in a fallen, broken world because of sin. You guys understand that? We live in a fallen, broken world because of sin. And because of that, evil people make choices. People make choices. We all make choices. Even us, we make choices, bad choices sometimes, and our choices affect other people and other choices. And we have to realize that we're in a fallen world. Even the earth and the rocks in this place cry out for God, Paul says in Romans chapter 8. He says all of creation is crying out, waiting, aching for the redemption of his sons, of God's sons. See, we live in a fallen, broken world, and we have to realize because of that, there's crisis. And God is giving us a moment, a time to choose, to live, to display our faith in him. We will have problems. Problem is we cannot be overwhelmed by these problems. You know, will we be overwhelmed by it, or will we see it as an opportunity to display our faith in God so others can see? Here's the thing, guys. No matter how big our problem is, who's bigger? God, right? And that's what we believe. Our God is bigger than any problem, any obstacle that we could face. We serve a great big God. A great big powerful God. That's who we follow. That's who we serve. See, problems may be big, but our God is bigger. He's bigger than anything that we face, anything that we can go through. And so that point leads us to the next thing that we learned from Elisha, this faith builder. Number 2, walk with your big God. Walk with your big God. That's the second thing we have to learn from this. See, Elisha walked with his great big God. He did life with his great big God. And everybody knew it, didn't they? So when this was happening, they were like, oh, wait a minute. Elisha, he has this relationship with God, and he's able to see. God tells him things, and he tells the king of Israel. He walked with his great big God, and people saw that in his life. And they knew who was doing that, who was giving the information. You see, people ought to see that in us, that we walk with a great big God. And we walk around with confidence because we walk with a great big God. I don't know how many of you guys have seen the movie My Bodyguard. Not The Bodyguard with Kevin Costner. This is an old movie, so all you guys should be good. So, My Bodyguard was an old movie, and it had Matt Dillon in it. He was the bully in the movie. Anybody remember that movie? He was the bully. And there was this little scrawny kid. He was a new kid in school. And Matt Dillon and his gang was bullying this little kid, this new kid. They were beating him up. They were bullying him. And this little kid heard, this story about, they were telling him about this big guy, this really, really big guy in the school that everybody was afraid of. And Matt Dillon was saying, we're protecting you from him. Well, this little scrawny guy, what he did was he went to the really big guy in the school in the movie. He goes, can you help me? He goes, these other guys are bullying me, but I need your help. And they ended up, this little new kid and this really big guy started building a friendship. And in the movie, what happens is that's called My Bodyguard. He becomes his bodyguard. He protects him. And when they're walking together, and it shows scenes, he's really big and he's small. And he's walking with him and trusting in him, and they have this friendship, and the little bullies can't mess with him because he has this relationship with the big guy. You see, this world can be a bully. Satan is a bully. And he uses everything in his world as his tool, things and people, to be a bully in your life and in my life. And the thing is we have a relationship with a big God. And we need to step into that relationship. We need to walk with God. We need to hang out with him. We need to learn from him. We need to learn to trust him and walk with him. We need to learn to do this life with God. See, Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18, this is what he says. I'm not going to read the whole verse, but I'm going to read part of it. Paul says this. He says, put on the full armor of God. Basically, put on this relationship with God. Put on all the things that God gives you so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes, against that bully. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and the spiritual forces, the spiritual armies. You see, we are surrounded by an army, but our God is bigger in the heavenly realms, in a realm that we can't see physically, but it's there. You see, God is coming at you. Or not God is coming at you. Satan is coming at you. God's there to protect you. And you need to lean into God. You need to trust God in that relationship with God. Satan is doing everything, and we need to be aware of that. We need to realize that Satan, there's something going on that we don't see. Satan is trying to trip you up, trying to get you to give up and give in and not trust God. But God is with you, and you need to lean into that. Put on his armor. He's the big one, in case you didn't know. Our God is a great big God. He's a great big God, and we need to have that relationship with him. Know your God and do life with him. And that's what Elisha knew God. Elisha was confident in his God, right? I mean, that's what it said. He was confident. When the servant said, oh no, what was Elisha doing? He's like, man, we don't have to worry. God's with us. And he said, open his eyes. Listen to this in John 13. I love in John chapter 16. John chapter 16, verses 33. Jesus is preparing his disciples. Jesus is preparing his disciples because they're getting ready to face an obstacle, right? I mean, they've been following Jesus. They've been hanging out with Jesus. They've been walking with Jesus. And Jesus says, you know what? Time is coming. I'm not going to be here. They're going to come and they're going to arrest me. They're going to beat me. They're going to put me on a cross, and I'm going to die. You're going to face an obstacle. And you guys, and he says, right before he says it, says, you know what? You guys are going to flee. You guys are all going to run and hide. Because you're going to face this obstacle. And this is what he says to them and what he says to us right now. He says, in this world you will have what? What's it say? Trouble, right? In this world you will have trouble. But take heart. I have overcome the world, he says. He says, I have overcome the world because he is our great big God. He's overcome the world. See, our God is the victor. He's the champion. He is the one that saves and rescues, right? Our God is the one that rescues, and he is with us when we walk with him. He walks with us. He does life with us. He is with us. And Elisha knew that. And he lived with his God and walked with him. You see, Elisha prays to his servant, open his eyes. Let him see what I see. Let him see that you're here with us and you're protecting us and you're following us and you're with us. So he does this so his faith, his servant's faith, can grow. You see, God is with us. And his promise, that's what his promise was before he went to heaven. He says, I'm going to be with you to the ends of the age. I'm always going to be with you. And this leads to the last point. God alone is the one who rescues. God alone rescues. We walk by faith in God. Guys, we take steps of faith every day, and we have to take steps. We have to read our Bibles. We have to do actions. We have to do things. God calls us to serve others and serve him, and every day we take steps of faith. But it's God alone who saves. All we do is serve. But God is the one that rescues. God is the one that saves. You don't save your friend. All you do is share the information with him. All you do is you live your faith out and you pass that faith on. God is the one who saves and rescues and redeems. And it's only him. And we have to know that. You know, through all these troubles, this is what James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4 says. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds. You know, James says, consider that joy. Consider that as an opportunity for you to display your faith to your friends, to your family, to your co-workers. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And this testing of our faith helps us to grow. See, the trials we face, these obstacles, drive us to depend on God. I talked about that 2 weeks ago in a sermon, you remember? I said these obstacles, these crises, these moments of things are great opportunities that drive us to depend on God. It helps us to trust God. It helps us to grow. It helps us to learn. He says, consider that joy for us to learn, for us to grow, for us to have the opportunity to display our faith. See, God is our rescuer. And Elisha, as the army attacked, they were on the hill and they began running down at Elijah. They began to run down towards Elijah to attack, to capture him. And it says this, that Elisha prayed, right? That Elisha prayed. Did Elisha pull out a sword? Did Elisha call on this army of God? Did Elisha do anything? He prayed. And he turned to God who rescued him. And it says that he asked him to blind their eyes. And God did that. God took away this army's sight. And he blinded them. He blinded them. And now who's dependent on God, right? I mean, Elisha was like, they're coming at him. They had the upper edge. But all of a sudden, because of God, and God rescuing Elisha, they're dependent. They can't see anything. They don't know where they're going. They're lost, right? You imagine you walking and all of a sudden losing your sight? How are you going to react? You're going to feel lost, right? You're going to be like, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. And all of a sudden you're in crisis mode. And you're lost and you don't have any direction. And Elisha, at this moment, he could just destroy him, right? Elisha could take them all out. This is what Elisha does. He takes their hands and he begins to guide them. He begins to lead them. And we'll come back to that in a minute. See, Elisha is free and calm because he knows God. And that God alone is the one who rescues. And that God alone is enough. See, Elisha doesn't need anything but God. Guys, in our lives, you don't need anything but God. This is what we need to hear this morning. That God is enough. God is enough for you. No matter what you're going through, no matter what you're facing, no matter what you will face, God is enough. All the time. God is enough. You face a sickness or an illness, God is enough. You face a friend who's angry or hates you or confrontational, God is enough. You lose your job, and you're struggling with finances, God is enough. You lose somebody that's close to you, God is enough. God is always enough. No matter what you're going through. Let that sink in this morning. God is enough. Maybe you're struggling with your spouse. Maybe they don't believe. God is enough. God alone is enough. What are you carrying? God knows, and He is enough. You see, Elijah's servant was afraid in that moment. He was afraid, right? I mean, all he saw was the obstacle. Whatever that obstacle is, Elisha said to his servant, God is enough. God is enough. In his book titled Holiness, J.C. Ryle closes his book with the chapter, Christ is all. That's his last chapter of his book, in the book of Holiness, that he writes about this relationship, this pursuit of this relationship with God. You see, guys, we come in to this church every week, or we sit down with our Bible every week, and we begin reading these words, right? Here's the thing, is sometimes we begin reading these words with, God, what are you going to do for me? God, what are you going to teach me that I can use? And there's nothing wrong with some of that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But here's the thing, is sometimes that becomes the only purpose that we're reading our Bibles. Sometimes you guys we got Bible reading plans or whatever, and we're just checking off the boxes, right? And it's good to read your Bibles, but here's the thing, is Christ is all. You know, he says in his book, he wraps up, he wants to do this on purpose. He gets to the very end, and he talks about all these things that we have to do to pursue holiness, to pursue this relationship with God, the disciplines that we put in our lives. And he goes, you know what? All of those are good things. We need those things in our lives. But he goes, I want you to know that no matter what, even with all of those things, that Christ is all. He is all you need. You know, all of these things, it's just Christ. It's about Him and walking with Him and being with Him. Christ is all. There's a quote that he says in that chapter. And he says this. He says, is it a Bible in which you have found nothing more than good moral precepts and sound advice? Or is it a Bible in which you have found Christ? Is it a Bible in which you have found Christ? And then he says, is it a Bible in which Christ is all? He and He alone is enough. So we have a God, get this. We have a God that became one of us. He became one of us, and he walked on this earth, and that's amazing, isn't it? I mean, just alone, that is amazing that our God, of all these other religions, our God, He left His throne, and He became a man just like us, one of us, and He walked this earth, and He experienced all the heartbreaks that we experience. He experienced the pains that we experience. He experienced the rejection that we experience. He experienced the beating and the spitting and the humiliation that we experience sometimes. And He experienced the death that we will experience. And He did all of that for us. And He did that, and He understands exactly how we feel. We read Hebrews chapter 4, verses 15 through 16. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. We have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence. Here's that word again, confidence. So that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of what? Need. We have a God who knows exactly how we feel. See, Jesus is all we need. He is enough. See, Jesus cares about our physical needs, guys. It's not that God doesn't care about our physical needs, our time here. You know, people brought the sick to Jesus. I mean, when you read the Bible, people were bringing the sick to Jesus. The sick and the broken were coming to him for healing. And what did Jesus do? He healed them, right? He took care of their physical needs. He says, I know what you need. And it doesn't mean that he's going to do that all the time for us, but he knows that there's something bigger. There's a spiritual need. There's a need that's beyond this world. He took care of that need. He said, that was the most important need I took care of for you. I died so that you could live. I paid your price on the cross so that you can have life and live. I defeated death so you can rise again and live with God. See, why do we come here, guys? Why do we come here every week? You guys remember when Jesus saved you? You remember the time that you stood before God and you surrendered your heart to him. You guys remember that? That moment when you came face to face with the creator of this world. He looked at you in your eyes. He said, I love you. I died for you. That you and me could be together forever. Remember that day? You said, yes, I'll follow you. If you don't, you need to take time. You need to take time to remember. You need to take time to be still and remember, what God did for us, to remember that moment we gave our life to God. Live in that moment and walk in that moment every day. You see, Elisha had the army of God at his disposal. He did. He had this great big army, and he could have, like I said earlier, he could have rained down fire. He could have just said, God, kill all of them. But he didn't. It says that he led them, he took them, and he guided them somewhere else. And he actually put them in front of the king of Israel's army. And he asked God to open their eyes so they can see again. And in this moment, Elijah chooses grace. This moment, Elijah chooses to display grace. Just as God displays grace when we're lost, He gives us life and hope. Even when we were God's enemies, Christ died for us. And when the evil king wanted to kill them, Elisha says, no. Eat. Give them the food that they need. Send them back to their master. They need to see grace. They need to see a God who loves and cares and saves. They need to see faith, a faith in us, that we trust God and we're not afraid of them and what's going on, what they can do. See, God gives us grace. Even when we were enemies of Him, He demonstrated grace. Romans 5:8 says, God demonstrates His love for us in this. While we were still sinners, while we were still enemies, what did He do? He died for us. He gave us grace. See, sometimes, guys, sometimes our obstacles aren't really the enemy. We got to understand that it's an opportunity for us to display our faith. Sometimes we have to understand that our obstacles is maybe it's somebody else, just like this army. You know, as we do life with people, Satan is the one that's behind all of this. And they may have some evil and they're lost, but we got to guide them. We got to show them grace and life and love and all of it, just like our Father showed us. So let's pray together.